recorded messages too.
Right.
People who couldn't be here, would like to have been here, but they're not here. So we have that for you coming up.
Right. Please stay around because we have two panelists who have a lot to say. They're amazing, two women. But before that, we're going to listen to two Cubans that live abroad. One is Nachito Herrera. He's a pianist. He just came to Cuba with a donation. He was here in a music festival. He's brave enough to express his opinion, to express his patriotism. In these times, that's a risky sport. And he was kind enough to send a recorded message. And afterwards, we'll listen to Carlos Lazo, el profe Carlos Lazo. He's a Cuban-American activist. He's been working hard for years to construct, to build bridges of love, and believes that the only way in which this conflict can be solved is through love and through explaining and exposing the American people to the sufferings of the Cuban family. Let's listen to both of them.
I am dreaming, definitely, to see the end of this blockade, which has been something with no sense at all. And unfortunately, I have to say, like, I am one of the perfect example of what the collaboration in between United States and Cuba can do in terms of like a saving life, in terms of the music, the culture, and the art. It is something. It wasn't supposed to happen. It is something we have been fighting for more than 63 years. And as you said, you know, I hope I can still alive to see the end of this. Something is completely unhuman. It is cruel. It is something is insane. And I am looking forward. I'm looking forward to bring lots of friends from the United States, mi Cuba.
60 years of blockade. 60 years of the Cuban people resisting the attack of the biggest power in the world, trying to bend the knees of the Cuban people. Sometimes we lose a perspective and think that the blockade is against the Cuban government from the United States government, but the blockade is against the Cuban families, trying to bend their knees, trying to make the Cuban families to explode. And for that reason, the United States implements measures to attack, to castigate the Cuban families. For that reason, the United States prevent us, Cubans in the United States, from sending money to our families in the middle of a pandemic. This is very cruel. This violates the human rights of 11 million Cubans who live in Cuba, and other millions who live out of Cuba. It's time for the United States to lift these sanctions, for let the Cuban people to live, for lifting the blockade. Cubans around the world support the lifting of the blockade that affect and punish the Cuban families. That's what we want, and that's what the whole world wants, lifting of the blockade.
Thank you so much to both of them for sending this recorded message. And now our final two panelists, two women that have a lot to say about the history between Cuba and the United States. I want to start with Gail Walker. She is often here in Cuba with Pastors for Peace. She is practically Cuban. I'm sorry, I have to say that. I just can't avoid to say that. She knows Cuba, she loves Cuba very much, and she has dedicated her life, as your father did, to denounce how unfair the U.S. sanctions are on Cuba, and how important it, and it's a demonstration, your presence here, your work, your life, and the leadership and the grassroots work that you do in the U.S. is a proof that the U.S. is full of good people, people of good heart that need to be exposed to this tragedy that the embargo is. And Johanna Tablada, ambassador, she's the deputy director of the U.S. division of the foreign minister here in Havana. She's served in the U.S., in Belize, in Portugal, and she's quite a bright woman and knows a lot about Cuba-U.S. relations. I do have a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but I'll get to you in a moment. We want to start with Gail, right, Ed?
That's right. It's a pleasure to have Gail Walker with us. She's she's a longtime friend.
There we go.
We go back almost 30 years now to the first caravan in November of 1992,
Yes.
Pastors for Peace, with your father, the Reverend Lucius Walker Jr. And as you mentioned, Christina, she is with IFCO, Pastors for Peace. It's the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization, IFCO, and Pastors for Peace, and has been doing these caravans now almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years this year, in November.
That's right. Wow.
Gail, thanks for being here. You're here in Cuba with some students from the who will be studying here.
Yes.
U.S. students with the Latin American School of Medicine, which is also coordinated out of New York, out of Harlem,
Yes.
where your offices are there in Harlem in New York City.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about what you know and what you know about this.
Well, it's an honor. It's an honor. Christine, it's good to see you again, and Ed, my dear friend, and so many familiar faces here. It's really an honor for us to do this work. It's a blessing. We do it love and tremendous admiration for what Cuba has done and stands for and represents. So many years of struggle against the genocidal blockade that has been imposed by the U.S. government, but has always stood. Cuba has stood and represents resistance, and that's why we do this work. We recognize the immoral, illegal, in terms of international, on the international level, the references to the United Nations. I had the honor on numerous occasions to be in the audience at the UN when the vote was taken against the blockade. And it's important for us, those of us in the United States who are opposed to this policy, to be able to express our opposition to this policy, because we represent the will of the vast majority of people in the U.S. who are indeed in favor of improved relations. And so it's our profound honor to be here and to bring students. We've got a new batch of students who are taking advantage of the tremendous gift that Cuba has offered the world, and particularly the people who have actually, the people of the United States who have been also in their own way pushing against U.S. policy. We have had the tremendous opportunity to bring young people to study medicine here at the Latin American School of Medicine. We saw some of them on the screen earlier. It's an example of Cuba's commitment to medical internationalism, and we have been honored and see that tremendous gift and see it paying off. And so that's why we're here. We came to bring the students. We're here to talk about the next caravan that we'll be organizing. But solidarity is forever, and we're a part. We just come representing the will of those in the U.S. who want to see relations between our two countries improved and are opposed to this policy, this long-standing policy.
Thank you so much, Gail. And thank you for your work for years. I do remember this very powerful image. Probably now, I think this is the first time that you made a direct flag with, like, Pastors for Peace made a direct flag with everything.
Yeah.
There's a very powerful image of your dad bringing, like, physically computers and supplies over a border,
Yes.
walking, because that was the only way
Absolutely.
of doing it. So heroic,
Yeah.
and we're so grateful for that.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Ambassador Tablada, Johanna, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to ask you a question. Recently, there was a tweet by the U.S. Embassy in Havana asking for ideas on issues to be addressed by them. And most of the comments below were about the need of opening the consular services, of restarting the reunification, the family reunification program, urgencies that they obviously haven't listened to. How are things in this regard between the two countries, and how important is this?
Well, migratory issues and consular affairs is one of the angles that more easily illustrate the human cost that the unfair policies of the blockade represent. And of course, right now, U.S. is taking probably some pressure because after almost 5 years or more than 4 years of the arbitrary decision to close the office or out of lie, such as that science fiction idea that in Cuba diplomats were attacked. Today they are repacking again a different theory to continue with the justification, because out of different places of the world with the so-called headache or dizziness or symptoms that till one day were exactly that, a headache and dizziness, and we don't know why, or probably we do. From one day to the other, a headache turns into something else. So after 4 years and a half, probably the only country on earth where very hard and unfair coercive measures were taken in order to justify a setback on a policy was Cuba. So right now, lots of people are asking for how long people will have to suffer, for how long people will have to pay 3 times the price of a trip in order to get close to a relative, for how long families will remain separate. And this is just one, but probably a very, very inhuman angle where U.S. policy, both Trump, who closed the consular office, and also the government of Biden, that continue enforcing the same policy of abuse on a very big operation of misinformation in order to blame Cuba for the impact of the unilateral coercive measures that very unfairly hurts the majority or the entire Cuban population.
Thank you so much, Johanna Tablada, for being here, Gail Walker. We still have one last recorded message that I really think we should air.
That's right. This is a journalist who, journalists are also affected by the blockade. This is a young woman, Cuban journalist, Alejandra Garcia Elizarde.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
And she has a very personal story
That's
around
right, she has a very
sanctions.
personal story, and she wants to tell us about it. We want to listen.
Right.
My name is Alejandra Garcia, and I am a Cuban journalist. I was born in 1993. I'm 28 years old, and I know of no other reality than living in a blockaded country. When I was a child, I had no real perception of what it was like to live under that invisible economic fence. The same happened with my closest and contemporary friends. I was a happy child. I didn't realize then the juggling my mom did to get food and medicines for her only daughter who was always sick. All the photos of that time revealed those efforts. I always looked the same, a chubby girl with frizzy hair. On the other hand, my mother, a single mother, always looked thin and exhausted. For the past 2 years, I've been taking care of my grandma on my father's side. Since then, I have experienced the efforts my mom made in the 90s, but amid an unprecedented pandemic that changed the usual life of Cubans and the world. In these 2 years, I've spent many hours in lines to buy food or medicines for my grandma. The pandemic, the blockade, and the more than 240 measures imposed by Trump first and maintained by Biden when he came to power created an overwhelming shortage and a sense of suffocation that is difficult to describe. But the Cuban people have an unsuspected capacity to overcome obstacles. Amid all these adversities, Cuba devoted all its resources to the fight against the COVID-19. Despite the blockade and the U.S. government attempts to strangle us, Cuba managed to create its effective vaccines to protect us. My 88-year-old grandmother has 3 doses of Abdala and received a booster 2 weeks ago. She hasn't been infected with the virus, but if she does, I know she will be protected. Today, Cuba is gradually returning to normality, thanks to this vaccination campaign which also took place in record time. But this normality won't be the same as that experienced by most countries in the world. Cuba will continue to live under the shadow of an economic blockade that doesn't allow us to live to our very fullest, especially for the young adults. But we are resilient people, and we will defeat the blockade.
Thank you so much. Alejandra Garcia is a bright journalist, and she has a very personal experience on how hard it is for a Cuban young woman to be to live and to was being born and live and achieve her maximum potential in a country that is sanctioned and suffers so much. I just want to end with an idea, by the way, that Johanna Tablada, right next to me, told me yesterday in the interview that I made that will be aired tonight at Cuban National Television. This is not only a year in which we have to remember the fact that John F. Kennedy signed the Proclamation 3447. It's also the importance of understanding that this is 60 years in which this country has resisted such an aggressive combination of legislation and political dispositions to simply topple a government, to impose a political end, and even between generations of Cubans live under austere conditions, suffered these effects. It doesn't seem to matter to those that impose this policy. Is a behavior of a bully taking advantage of its power just to topple one government, and of course with using the suffering of an entire people just to make their will happen. But that's not even an option, Ed. Resistance is going to be the only way this country, the history of this country has demonstrated so. So thank you so much for being around. These 2 hours and 30 minutes we've been on the air. We've talked to so many interesting people. You can look up on YouTube or on Facebook afterwards if you want to watch any particular part of our broadcast.
That's right.
Great to be with you, Ed.
It's a pleasure. Great to be with you, Cristina Escobar. I'm Ed Newman from Radio Havana, Cuba, from Cubavisión Internacional, Cubavisión. And we want to thank the people here, the workers, the technicians that put this whole thing together, because without them, you wouldn't be watching us right now.
Right. Or listening to us.
Or listening to us on the radio, or watching on TV, or on the social networks, and the people here and the students, of course, at the Raúl Roa García Higher Institute of International Relations, studying to become diplomats.
Right. And listening to so many bright professionals of the Cuban diplomacy. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we will see each other around.